Welcome to DEFCON 3. I'm KT McFarland. We've seen in the last week with the Paris massacres that the attacks from radical Islam continue to threaten the West. The head of MI5, the British Homeland Intelligence Agency, he's come out in an unprecedented public speech to say that the attacks may happen in Britain. The Germans have said the same thing, and the French leaders have said, you know, we could expect more reprisal attacks in France. So what about the United States? What about our homeland? Joining me to discuss is Tom Joscelyn of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies and editor of the Long War Journal. So, Tom, what about the American homeland? Should we expect more attacks of this nature?
Well, you know, the threat's there. The difference is I think there's a greater threat to European nations than here, only because it's easier to get to and from jihadist hotspots and these European countries. So that's one factor. But, you know, the threat remains here in the U.S. homeland as well, because we've seen in the past where, despite spending billions of dollars to stop attacks, that some get through. Now, they're smaller scale attacks, but they still get through. The Boston bombings, for example, you know, the older brother involved there was a known quantity in counterterrorism circles. He's somebody who trained abroad, or we think he trained abroad with jihadists in Chechnya and Dagestan and that sort of thing. You know, the Fort Hood shooter, you know, this is a guy who was known, even though he didn't travel abroad, he was known to be a radical, he was known to be radicalized and basically going that way. And, you know, Christmas Day 2009, you know, we remember how, you know, a guy got on a plane with an underwear bomb coming into the U.S., and it was only because he couldn't get the bomb to detonate that it failed. You know, just a couple blocks from here, Times Square, in May 2010, what happened? A guy who traveled abroad to Pakistan came back and nearly set off a car bomb. So the threat remains. You know, whether it'll be successful or not really depends on a lot of factors. But the bottom line is the threat's still there.
You know, Senator Feinstein, outgoing chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, was asked, and she said, you know, sleeper cells already could be here. What is the likelihood that there already are existing sleeper cells that could be activated?
It's possible. I mean, you know, obviously, if they're sleeper cells, we don't know about them.
That's
the problem
until
it's too late. But I mean, it's certainly possible. I mean, part of the thing with sleeper cells, the trick is to make sure to keep their operational capacity up. It's tough to keep a sleeper cell in a foreign nation for years and years and years, and basically make sure they can still go forward with the attack. But it doesn't mean it's impossible. If you find the right guys to do it, you can carry it out. You know, there are some indications right now, in fact, that in the Paris attack on Charlie Hebdo, that those guys were basically a sleeper cell. That they had been sent, you know, a couple of years ago and were basically stationed there to do the bidding of Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. So it's certainly possible.
Is this a law enforcement issue? Is it a counterterrorism issue? I mean, how do we as the United States best protect ourselves against future attacks or the enemy within?
I think it's an all-hands-on-deck issue. I think basically it's all of the above. I mean, there are different sort of problems within the global problem. But the bottom line is we're fighting an ideology, not just we're fighting organizations that adhere to that ideology and an ideology. And they have a cohesive worldview, and they're pushing forward. And, you know, we're sitting here, you know, well more than a decade after 9/11, and they're still pushing forward. They're fighting in more countries today. The jihadists are fighting in more countries today than they ever have been. You know, and they're moving forward with their plans for the world. We have to see that as an ideological threat, and the fact that this is something that's growing. The tide of war is not receding. Unfortunately, it's growing, and we need to have a comprehensive strategy for dealing with that.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us. That's Tom Joscelyn, Foundation for the Defense of Democracies and the Long War Journal. If you want to know more about the threat to the homeland, go to foxnews.com. Thanks for joining DEFCON 3. I'm KT McFarland.